Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you join us live today for this Built for Shopify webinar. I'm Jonathan Zazoff, Director of Product at Shopify, and I'm joined by Mark Appleby, a staff UX designer. A little later on, we'll have two Shopify partners joining us, Chris Geis, CEO and founder of Seguno, as well as Bill Curtis, CTO of Smile.io. We've got a great session ahead of us today. Hopefully after today, you'll feel ready to apply for Built for Shopify. Let's walk you through the agenda. I'll kick things off with an overview of the Built for Shopify program. Then I'll pass to Mark, who will break down the requirements for an app to be considered well integrated. After that, Chris and Bill will join us to demo their apps and give us a look into their exemplary embedded app experiences. And finally, we'll close out the session with a Q&A with all of you to help us answer your integration questions. You could submit your questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen anytime throughout the webinar. So let's start with a quick overview of the Built for Shopify program and explain why we're so committed to holding apps to such a high standard. We want to empower merchants to attract more customers, design beautiful storefronts, and boost their sales. And we know as app developers, you want to help merchants too. But merchants can struggle if they're burdened with software that's slow, confusing, or clunky. We're obsessed with making Shopify the best commerce platform for merchants to use. Since nearly every merchant uses apps, we've created the Build for Shopify program so you can build the highest standards and get rewarded for it too. What do apps get as for being built for Shopify? App Store badging, search boosts, promotion, in-editorial and admin, and plan targeting for App Store ads. These tools are designed to help great apps stand out from the crowd, and they work. Apps with Built for Shopify status see accelerated growth with an average 50% increase in installs in just 14 days of achieving status. Okay, so you all understand the benefits of Built for Shopify. Well, let's talk about the requirements. We have established three pillars that we think make great software: performance, design, and integration. Today, we're specifically going to focus on integration. A merchant doesn't have a lot of time. Shifting between multiple tools and UIs can be cumbersome and also makes it harder for them to get a single view of how their business is doing. That's why we care a lot about apps being what we call well integrated. Well integrated apps feel seamless to the rest of the Shopify admin and make it easy for merchants to get work done. Now, I'm going to pass it to Mark, who's going to show us what good looks like.
Thanks, Jonathan. So, what do we mean by well integrated? Well, there are four components to our definition. Number one, seamless signup. This means that merchants don't need to authenticate with an email or password in order to try out your app. It should be ready to use immediately after it's installed. Number two, primary workflows are embedded. The merchant can complete critical tasks from within the embedded app instead of having to leave Shopify to get things done. Number three, simplified monitoring and reporting. If your app includes monitoring or complex reports that live on an external website, you must include a simplified version of those reports in the Shopify admin. And number four, keep third-party connection settings within the Shopify admin. Any settings between Shopify and a third-party system should be easy to connect and disconnect inside your app. The best way to understand how these requirements work is to show you what good looks like. So I'm going to walk through the Shopify email app to show you how it meets the well-integrated criteria. Okay, now let's take a look at what happens when we first install Shopify email. Typically, you'd expect there to be a sign-in form here. However, there are no forms and no need for a username or password, as the app has already created an account for the user in the backend. This allows merchants to dive into the app immediately and provides them with a seamless experience in moving from the Shopify admin to the app. The average merchant has over 6 apps installed, and that number is way higher when you look at Plus merchants. While one app sign-in might not seem like a hassle, managing separate accounts for each app is highly inefficient for merchants. Seamless signup also has benefits to the app itself. A major barrier to app adoption is a time-consuming setup process. By removing this friction and letting merchants start using the app right away, they can more easily come to understand the value of the app. Now, let's take a look at the app's homepage here. The homepage is concise and guides merchants with clear calls to action. Later, after the app has been used for some time, the homepage evolves to guide merchants to helpful next steps and to concisely display key information. The App Bridge nav menu component is used to ensure that the app's navigation seamlessly integrates with the Shopify admin. Also, just another note here, Shopify email uses Polaris, the Shopify admin design system. Now, you don't have to use Polaris to meet the Built for Shopify requirements. However, it fits seamlessly into the admin and it will help you get to BFS faster. Okay, let's create an email campaign, one of the primary functions of this app. First, you can see we're using the AppBridge Max modal here, so the email editor can have more real estate on the page. I start by picking a template, and the editor is interactive, and the template is fully customizable, just like the online store editor. Another great thing here is the interactive code editor, even including autocomplete. The key thing I want to call out here is that everything I need to do, onboarding, settings, fully creating a campaign, editing emails, and even editing code, can all be achieved within the Shopify admin. So that's what we mean by embedding primary workflows. Okay, let's move on to the third requirement, monitoring and reporting. As you could probably guess, there's a lot of metrics attached using Shopify email. We have basic performance metrics, total email sent, open rate, click rate, and sales attributed. Scrolling further down is a more comprehensive view of all my campaigns. Now, think about the metrics that matter most to your merchants, and make sure you include them in your embedded app. This allows the merchant to have a single view of their business performance right on Shopify. The final requirement of Well Integrated is to keep third-party connection settings within Shopify. For example, here in the Shopify Marketplace Connect app, you can see merchants have the ability to edit existing third-party connections, including disconnecting them. Giving merchants simple ways to connect and disconnect third-party connections inside the Shopify admin is essential in making their experience easy to manage. Okay, now that we've covered the four requirements, I just want to quickly also plug admin UI extensions here, as they're the perfect way for your app to meet merchants where they're already working. We've added a ton of admin UI extension targets, which means there's almost certainly an extension target that's relevant for your app's unique use case. For example, the Shopify email app lets merchants create email campaigns right from the product details page. This is an example of what we call an app action. The Shopcode app lets merchants view and create relevant QR codes right on the product details page. This is an example of an app block. And lastly, the Shopify Order Printer app lets merchants leverage it to print orders right from the Shopify Order Details page. This is an example of the new Print Action extension. These are just a few examples, so as you're scoping out your BFS build, I'd recommend looking for areas where you'd like to display information or take action on a specific Shopify resource. These are prime areas to leverage admin UI extensions. You can find full documentation, including guides and API references on shopify.dev. Admin UI extensions are just one example. Shopify has a whole suite of extensions that you can leverage to create a deeper integration with minimal effort.
We know embedding your app might seem difficult, so we also wanted to share some amazing apps in our ecosystem that have successfully built embedded experiences and achieved Built for Shopify status. To start, let's take a look at our first app demo from Smile.io from their CTO, Bill Curtis.
Hi everyone, I'm Bill from Smile, and today I'll be sharing 3 essential tips for embedding your Shopify app. Tip number 1, simplify your navigation. When you embed your app in Shopify, you can add navigation items to the left menu. Over time though, as you add new features, the navigation can get naturally quite cluttered and overwhelming. In Smile's case, we launched on Shopify in 2018 and have been adding new features and functionality ever since. One of the byproducts of this is our left navigation did get pretty overwhelming. There were too many items. And while Shopify supports this, many items ended up being hidden away, which make them really hard to find for merchants. So we identified which items were needed really often and which ones weren't. And the ones that weren't, we moved over into the onboarding flows or tucked them away into settings. This left us with a much cleaner navigation with fewer, more essential items that fit well within Shopify's embedded experience. The result, easier navigation for merchants with all the important features within easy reach. Tip number 2, deep link to your app. When promoting new features, whether it's through emails, blogs, or social posts, it's important to make it easy for merchants to try them out. This year at Smile, we launched the ability for merchants to run points bonus events, like a double points weekend, for example. And we wanted all of our marketing content to link them directly into Smile so they could set up their first event. Typically, we would link them to our standalone app at app.smile.io, to the points bonuses page. But when we looked at the data, we realized most merchants weren't actually logged into our app. They were logged in through Shopify, using our embedded experience. And this made a lot of sense. So instead of sending them to a page where they're just going to hit a login screen, we took advantage of one of Shopify's possibly most underrated features, which is seamless login for embedded apps. Basically, if a merchant's logged into Shopify, which they often are, they're also logged into your app. The question is, what URL do you use so that you can send them to the exact part of your app that you want them to interact with? Turns out, if you know what you're looking for, it's pretty easy to find. Log into Shopify, navigate to the exact page of your app where you want merchants to go, and copy the URL. Find the store-specific section and remove that. Now you have a path that you can use in your marketing content. This ensures merchants can try out new features quickly and smoothly without facing login screens. Tip number 3, use admin actions for quick tasks. The old way of doing this is using admin links, which allowed you to take a merchant from a page in Shopify to a related section within your app. For example, taking them from the customer's profile page in Shopify to that exact customer's page within Smile. Now, admin links are now considered legacy because they can be pretty disruptive to the merchant workflow. Good news is Shopify has a new approach, which is using admin actions, which allow merchants to complete tasks directly in Shopify without ever leaving the page. For example, in Smile, merchants often need to adjust a customer's points balance. With admin actions, they can do this directly from the customer's profile page in Shopify, saving them time and avoiding a bunch of extra clicks. Admin actions keep the merchant workflow seamless, making it faster and more convenient for them to use your app. To recap, those are 3 essential tips on embedding your Shopify app. Simplify your navigation to reduce clutter and improve usability. Deep link to your app in Shopify to ensure merchants are already logged in and can access new features easily. And use admin actions for quick tasks to streamline workflows. At Smile, we're really proud of achieving the Built for Shopify badge. We know merchants who use Smile really do notice. And I hope these tips help you embed your app within Shopify and achieve Built for Shopify as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. One thing I love about Smile is how they've been able to get creative with their navigation and embed it in an intuitive way. Next is Chris Geis, CEO of Seguno, demoing Seguno's email app experience.
Hey, this is Chris, co-founder of Seguno. I wanted to share 2 of our product principles that I think will help you on your Built for Shopify journey. The first principle is to seamlessly integrate everywhere. For context, we've been embedded from the beginning and using Polaris since it was first released over 7 years ago. We love Polaris and we think it's one of the best libraries out there for the following reasons. It is a very comprehensive component library. Not too often do we have to actually build something ourselves. Accessibility is built right in. It's well documented with great patterns to follow. It's well maintained with thoughtful evolutions and easy upgrades that enable you to stay up to date as Shopify evolves their own UI. The result of all that is that it really helps accelerate development. We don't have to worry about creating and maintaining a design system, including colors and iconography, so rarely do we even need to bring in a designer as we're building features. More importantly, customers love it. When the lines are blurred between your app and the Shopify admin, merchants find the app more intuitive and enjoyable, and they can stay in flow as they go about their work. Now, being embedded and using Polaris is step one, but there's a lot more to consider when it comes to being well integrated. Leveraging admin extensions, flow triggers and actions, segments, metafields, customer accounts, those are just a few examples. Let's take a look at one of our admin UI extensions. So right from this product page, we can add an app block for our reviews summary. This enables us to inject data from our app in the context of this product page. You can also do it with customers and orders. Here we deep link into our app. You can also pop open a modal to enable the merchant to perform an action without even having to open your app. This really just enables them to stay in flow as they're doing their work, and it's incredibly powerful. The second principle is to make complex things simple, because Shopify does, and that's what merchants expect. How can you take a robust feature with a lot of moving parts behind the scenes and boil it down to a checkbox? And one that's checked by default if most merchants will want it that way. A good example of this for Seguno is our automation builder. We really chose to streamline the editing experience here because automation is complex. Here we're looking at our welcome automation that starts as soon as someone subscribes. We send the first email immediately, and now we want to turn this into a series and wait 3 days before we send the second, and then wait a week before we send the third. We also have B2B buyers, so we don't want our wholesale customers receiving our regular welcome series. So we could exclude them with a tag or a segment. And since we're focused on conversion, as soon as someone places an order, we don't want them to receive any more emails. And we can do that with a checkbox. Now, the exclusion and exit criteria we just set would normally require multiple branching logic nodes before each send. So behind the scenes, this is something like a 10-node workflow, but we only expose what looks like 3 nodes to the merchant. We know there are a lot more complex use cases that people are interested in though, and we enable that through a strong integration with Flow. The last thing I wanted to give you a glimpse into is the editor. So let's jump in and customize this email. As you go to build a more complex editor, think about how you enable merchants to access their Shopify data. So let's jump into this image, and we could change that to pull from a product. Let's just use this leather jacket. And then we could change the link from our home page directly to that leather jacket product. So things like pickers are really important in terms of building that seamless experience and giving merchants access to their data. This is really just scratching the surface, but I hope it gives you an idea of the seamless experience you can create. While choosing to build this way is a big investment, I think it is absolutely worth it and would do it again if we were starting over. Best of luck, and let me know if I can help. Thanks.
Seguno is a great example on how to take a complex UI and embed it into Shopify. Thank you again to Smile.io and Seguno for letting us into your app experiences. And with that, let's get into the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Jay-Z. My name is Riley, and I'm a Partner Solutions Architect here at Shopify. I'm here to moderate the Q&A with Jay-Z, Bill, and Chris. So if you have any questions for them or for our team, please drop them now into the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. And let's jump into the Q&A. All right, our first question here is for Jay-Z. I already have an app that's built for Shopify, but I'm looking at making some big changes to the UI. Is there anyone I can send a mockup to before I build it all out to make sure it still complies with BFS guidelines?
Yes, thanks for your question. We don't currently support draft reviews for app builds, but our new Built for Shopify community forum could be a good place to get some insights from Shopify, Shopify, I should say, meaning people that work at Shopify and other developers that are part of that community now. So I'd recommend posting your mockup there if you're comfortable to get feedback and to get ideas to ensure your updates align with the Built for Shopify guidelines. You'll also find other resources there that might be helpful.
Thanks. Bill and Chris, as apps who have gone through this review process with our review team, I'd love to hear about your experience working through the feedback they provide. Chris, why don't we start with Seguno?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, overall, the review process is great and not too dissimilar from your initial app review process. What I really enjoyed that you guys built out was inside the partner portal, being able to see the automated check marks to make sure you've got a lot of those things kind of already in place. The metrics there to ensure you're meeting everything you need to. So then when you submit, then it's typically more just some design feedback or something like that, and you can have a couple rounds back and forth, and it's pretty smooth overall.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Bill.
Yeah, I describe our submission process in sort of two parts. There's the quantitative part where there, as Chris was mentioning, like log into your partner portal, you can see all the web vital metrics like LCP, and those are really just a matter of like optimizing your performance metrics to check the box, and now you sort of have that guaranteed as approved. The other part is the qualitative sort of design review, and like for us, it took a few back and forth. So if you're a new developer with a pretty small app in terms of surface area, you can probably get it through in the first go or second. If you're an app like us that's been around for years and has a lot of different areas, expect maybe a few back and forths. The nice thing about Polaris as a framework is a lot of the like Figma files and design components are already there, so you can sort of bring your app up to date with those. However, like certain small things are what the design review process is really helpful in. So for example, for us, there's a info banner, and we didn't realize that like, oh, you can't have it dismiss, or you must have it dismissible. And so small things like that are things that the Shopify team really helped us dial in for the final review parts.
Awesome, thanks, Bill. Yeah, and it's perfectly normal to go back and forth with the review team a couple of times. So if you're thinking about submitting your app for BFS certification, don't let that stop you. Okay, next question. How can we improve LCP with the measurement tool? So we actually just hosted a webinar on admin performance and how to optimize your LCP. So I highly recommend watching that as we cover everything here, including what web vitals are, how to approach them, and how we demo two of our new monitoring and debugging tools to help improve your app's performance. So the webinar itself is linked over in the resources tab, so definitely go ahead and give that a watch. I'll just move on to the next one here. For JZ, I work primarily in Vue.js related frameworks and Polaris and AppBridge are built on React. So how can we integrate these libraries with Vue.js? Will you also be developing libraries for other tech stacks like Vue apart from React in the future? Or what are the recommendations for developers working on different tech stacks?
Yes, very excited to get this question. I think a while back when we relaunched AppBridge and the latest version of AppBridge, we made a big post that we wanted to embrace the web platform. So totally hear the feedback that we haven't done that actually. We've made Polaris really truly built on React. Now we did change AppBridge to be a lot more based on web standards with an optional React package. But agreed on the Polaris experience. And so without getting into specifics, I will say that we are working very hard to make sure that Polaris will be sort of available to all developers, regardless if they know React or not.
That's great to hear. Thanks, JC. Now, I believe, Bill, you have a similar experience. Would you mind telling us about that with Smile?
Yeah, definitely. So many parts of Smile are built on React, but there's other parts that are built on Ember.js, which is another front-end web framework. And so we did, for those areas of the product, have to sort of study the React Polaris components and sort of like port them over to Ember components, which are very similar to React, but have a few different tweaks. It was more effort than just dropping in React components, but the effort we put into porting those over was well worth it when you think about the benefits of like having Polaris as a fully maintained design library and design system that Shopify keeps up to date, and we can lean on that to improve development speed and design speed, things like that, like Chris mentioned in his talk.
Perfect. So it sounds like the port to Polaris was worth it for the development speed that you gained for doing that.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, I have a highly detailed and interactive reporting. How do I know what counts as simplified monitoring and reporting? And that can be for Jay-Z.
Yeah, so the way I think about it is simplified reporting should be able to answer some, if not all, the following questions, which is like, is it on? Is it working? If not, what are the errors I need to fix? What's the status? Is it going well? If not, what's not going well and what do I need to change? Um, Maybe also like, how can I learn more and take action? So I think these are just some of the examples that you'll want to really solve for a merchant who's using your app and maybe set it up and then left and did something else and then came back and now maybe forgot because they were doing 100 other things and maybe even just interacting with buyers on the fly. And so you'll really want to give merchants a picture of that. It's sort of like, hey, is it working? Is it on? What do I need to fix? What do I need to celebrate because it's going very well?
So as a bit of a follow-up to that, why do apps need to include stats on the app homepage, even if the app doesn't necessarily report any stats or analytics? So for example, let's say the app adds a simple survey at the end of the thank you page.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is a great app, just in general, like should provide like daily value to whoever's using it. And so if your app, let's say, is an NPS survey, how does a merchant know the number of surveys going out? What is the success rate of the prompt? Do they need to change the prompt? So like you really want to give them a good picture of what's working and what's not. This is an example. There are a lot of ways to do that, but thanks for the question.
Great, thank you. Moving on to another tech stack question. I already have an app based on a PHP framework. So for Built for Shopify, do we need to completely rebuild that app? Or is there a way to still achieve Built for Shopify status?
Yeah, the simple answer rather is that we have plenty of apps written in PHP that are built for Shopify. We don't have any specific backend language requirements at all.
Great. So my app fulfills all the BFS requirements except for using Polaris. Is that good enough, Jay-Z?
Yeah, and the answer is Polaris is not a requirement. As long as you meet the app design guidelines and the other BFS requirements, then great.
All right, perfect. Going through here, I've seen some apps that only update a basic dashboard to get the Built for Shopify. They then have a button where it opens the full app externally into a separate website. Is this valid?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to say without seeing the app, but we're gonna start auditing all BFS apps to ensure they're continuing to meet the guidelines as long as they have the reward. So, TBD.
Okay, great. Yeah, the workflows to embed will definitely vary based on sort of what your app functionality is. And so it's hard for us to give any specific guidance over a webinar here. All right, another one for you here, Jay-Z. If we're using seamless signup, but we still have more complex functionality, which needs to happen off platform, how would you recommend we authenticate the user if they have no login credentials?
Yeah, it's really hard to say what without understanding this. So I would try to I would love to get clarity on what we mean that like would prevent actually seamless sign up. But yeah, I mean, merchants are trying to get work done and use your app. So we created the seamless sign up requirement to ensure merchants can just jump into your app and use it really quickly. So we think it actually benefits apps a lot more than you might think. And so I would really look into ways to enable that so that Shopify merchants can start using your app quickly.
Yeah, and so for Bill, you mentioned in your demo that one of the key sort of underrated features of Smile is the ability to sort of deep link right into an app. And if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like this is something seamless signup really enables. Could you tell us a little bit about that feature and how merchants have responded to it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people sort of underestimate the impact that such a small like friction, removing such a small piece of friction has. Our example is like whenever we ship a new feature, well, we want to let merchants know about it, and email is one of the ways that we do that. If you've ever received an email to like go and try a new feature, and then you click the button, and then you just hit with a login screen, you forget what email you signed up with, the password's empty. Do you remember your password? Like that's all just like drop off of the funnel of merchants actually like making it to the feature that you're excited to share with them. So the seamless sign-on is wicked. Like if I were to guess, 98% of any merchant is just logged into Shopify always every day, and therefore they're logged into your app and they can access it very, very quickly. So we love it for that reason.
It also works when someone has multiple shops too, right? So they click through, and
Oh
then
yeah,
Shopify provides
yeah,
them
yeah,
the
yeah.
ability to choose which store that they're trying to go into. So yeah, it's really great.
Right, that's a good point. All right. A couple questions here on the embedded side of things. Do I need to embed one-time configuration options or infrequently used profile options, e.g., change my name, my password, or generate API keys, things like this? I'll direct that over to Jay-Z.
Yeah, I think the default should be you should just embed everything just so it makes it easier for merchants to get work done. I think the analogy that I like to make is, in the early days of mobile when mobile apps didn't support all the use cases, and then they would eject you out into mobile web, and then you'd have to re-authenticate, and it was just not a great experience. So I would just default to say, hey, if you're embedded, like make a merchant's lives easier.
Perfect. Thanks, Jay-Z. I have autosave functionality built into my app. Do I still need to use the contextual save bar? And pass this to Jay-Z as well.
Sure. Yeah, so apps need to use the contextual save bar to comply with the app design guidelines. Continuous data validation or autosave for forms is not congruous with the standard Shopify admin save UX. So it is recommended to use the contextual save bar.
Could you tell us a bit more about Shopify's logic behind why we prefer an affirmative save button rather than autosave?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with there's multiple users potentially using the same that are part of the same store, and you don't actually know as an app developer, like, are you an app that's installed on a single user store, or are there many, many people using it? And so we just want to make sure that data stays in sync. I think that's the most important thing. And that is a hard thing to do in general, just because there's apps changing data, there's many people changing the core data, and so we created the contextual save bar to make sure people have that confirmation and know when changes are happening. So we make it really simple to understand. Hey, you're actually leaving a page that you haven't saved, and so that's really what we standardize on the UX to make sure people understand the implication of their changes, and also to work across the complexity of a large organization or a small organization.
That's great. Thank you. All right. I'll just answer this one because it's sort of a duplicate to what we've been asked. We'd like users to be aware that lower priority or low usage pages can be accessed on a browser. We boot them out of the embedded experience to do that. So kind of what we said before, in order to qualify for BFS, we should really default to all pages being embedded here. All right, so what is the best approach to embed a WYSIWYG code editor or a journey builder? Jay-Z.
Yeah. So I think those are great examples where, like, you need sort of a larger formatted screen for editors or configuration. And so we recommend using the average modal in the maxed variant, which gives you, a very large screen. It actually hides the left navigation of the admin, and gives you majority of the screen real estate. So that's highly recommended, and we see our first party apps using that as well.
Yeah, I'd love to dive in here with Seguno and Smiles. I know both of you have built some fairly complex UIs within both the Max Modal and also just directly within the embedded experience within Shopify. Wonder if you could tell us a bit about the experience, sort of specking that out from both the UX and development perspective. And why don't we start with Seguno?
Sure. So yeah, those more complex editors, you may sometimes have to build some custom UI pieces, but they're often made up of Polaris components. So from a UX spec standpoint, you got to think about the experience you're trying to create for your users. I would definitely encourage you to make sure, aside from meeting the design guidelines, but you want it to be complementary with any Shopify UI, right? So if you're kind of coming up with something new that you haven't seen, a specific guideline for, look around the Shopify product and try to find something that is similar, and then you can kind of base it off of that and kind of build from there. But the biggest point I think is removing complexity is really important. So as I kind of mentioned around the automation side of things, we try to really remove choices that merchants have to make, or them having to know all the kind of complex logic that's needed behind the scenes to make something work, when they just want to say yes or no to a question. So anytime you can do that, I think that's wonderful. Yeah, I think removing complexities is a big thing. Being complementary to Shopify, I think, is also really important. So when you think about, automations, in our case, we made that streamlined editor, which covers most cases for most merchants. But we know some people want to really get into the weeds and build the more complex logic themselves. And so we have a strong integration with Flow, and they're able to do that complex logic inside of Shopify, but still leverage, sending the email through Seguno, for example.
And I think making complex things simple is a philosophy that Shopify really leans into as well. In your demo, you mentioned the example of taking like 10 automation nodes and sort of wrapping them up, abstracting them behind 3 different email nodes. How do you think about doing that, and sort of where to draw the line?
It's a tough call in terms of where to draw the line, but I think you have to just have a good understanding of your merchants and the problems that you're trying to solve for those particular merchants, and you want to build for the majority. And so if you can make a choice for someone or give them a checkbox for something that 80-90% of the people will want, then that enables you to focus on those workflows and not as much on some of the edge cases that people want. That's maybe where to draw the line.
That's great, thanks. So over to you, Bill. Could you tell us more about your experience just building complex, rich functionality within Shopify?
Yeah. In Smile, I would say our richest functionality is configuring emails and what they look like and how they feel when they go out to customers who just earn points or just redeemed for a discount. To Chris's point, like, the key really is to simplify the experience, removing complexity, removing those things that when you had the full, standalone app, you just sort of added in as like, oh, some merchants may need these like intricate settings and stuff, and just really asking yourself like, hey, what do most merchants need most of the time? And like removing the things that aren't strictly necessary so that they fit nicely into an embedded version of your app. Now, the flip side, like, there's always going to be merchants that need to do more complex things. And so there's sort of 2 approaches here. I think the first is like strong integrations are very helpful. We have a very strong integration with Klaviyo as an example. And so merchants who need to customize HTML of emails or do really advanced things, they can just connect Klaviyo and use their more advanced editor and in replacement of the emails that Smile sends. The other tip I'd say is like I think Shopify does a really great job of simplifying the complex. And so if you study just the different pages within the Shopify admin or the apps that are built by Shopify, like Shopify email, you'll sort of like find some like patterns that are being used that I think can be helpful in crafting your own app.
That's great. Thank you both. Moving on to our next question here. For Jay-Z, our app is using an older version of Polaris. Is it necessary to be on the latest version to pass design requirements?
Yeah, I guess it's sort of similar to the previous question around like, is Polaris required? I think the blanket answer is no. I think the answer of the older version of Polaris might be actually you might need to update to the latest Polaris. It's really hard to say without seeing what the app looks like. But in the app design guidelines, I would definitely go through it and look to make sure you're conforming to like the color guidelines and things like that that have been updated since the last Polaris. So I think it's a maybe, but I'd have to see what your app looks like. And yeah, I think again, like we've created the newest version of Polaris to make your life easier. So that's why it's there.
And just on that, it may not be required, but I would definitely recommend it. You know, things like buttons and colors and that stuff changes over time. And so even though they may be using Polaris, it may still be a more jarring experience for someone when they open up your app because it just looks different now.
Yeah, can I just say like a quick PSA? If there's any app developers in the audience that like are building a new app and you sort of have the option to choose your tech stack or your design language, it's like go with Polaris, go with React. Like I would wager it's easier to learn and ramp up on React and how to use it so that you can adopt like Polaris in its sort of like native form than it is to stick with maybe a technology that you like and try and port a bunch of stuff over. Highly recommend just like lean into Polaris as much as you can. It's going to help speed up your team.
Awesome, thanks. All right, admin UI extensions. Where can we find best documentation on admin UI extensions? We're currently using Laravel, PHP, and our app with React. Are there any examples you guys know to make an admin action with Laravel or React? For Jay-Z.
Yeah, I mean the documentation is on Shopify.dev for admin extensions. I don't think there's a specific like we've tried to make them as general as possible. Admin extensions are pretty unique in that it's basically an API using remote UI that is more of an API, and so it describes what the Shopify admin should render. And so it's a very simple API. We're trying to make it even simpler. And so I think I mentioned it earlier, like some of the teams I manage are really investing in just relying on web standards as much as possible. And so stay tuned for that in that space. But right now, we offer two different flavors for admin UI extensions. One is React and the other is Vanilla.js.
Great. And Bill, I know Smile relies on admin UI extensions. Could you tell us a bit about that and how you kind of determine which features you want to build into those?
Yeah, we really just looked at like what are merchants doing in Smile most often and sort of stack rank those by how frequent certain actions are being done. The overwhelmingly like most common reason is like, hey, there's a customer who where you want to change their points balance, whether it's because of they showed up in store and you want to give them something extra, or just to make a correction. And so overwhelmingly, that's the major thing. So that was an obvious one to sort of pull into Shopify admin. And again, just doesn't break their workflow from like being in Shopify in the customer view. So I'd say look at your most popular things and move them into an extension if you can.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And Jay-Z, while we're on the topic, could you tell us about some general principles that app developers can use when determining when they should or shouldn't use an admin extension?
Yeah, I think the general principle is sort of like I should say we created the admin extensions because we thought merchants had a pretty bad experience with apps where they were getting ejected out of their workflows. And so we created it to like enable apps to have a say in their fluid workflows. And so that's really it. Like that's what we thought it was a bad experience for apps, and so we created them so that merchants have in context data, they have in context actions they can take across the ecosystem. Just like they don't have to think about it. They're like, yes, I'm using Smile, I'm using Seguno for my daily job. And I'm also integrating with products and orders and customers and all these things. And so really the philosophy is just around make seamless workflows. It's really that simple. And that's why we created it, and that's why we're going to continue to invest in that space.
Great, thanks. Moving on to the next question. This is regarding seamless sign-in. How would a seamless sign-up login workflow work if the user already has an account with us, so is not signing up through Shopify?
Yeah, I would say the answer to that is definitely, again, lean onto seamless sign-in. If you're concerned about allowing existing merchants to sign in, I would ensure the partner can connect to an existing account in settings or other areas. And we see other apps doing that today.
Okay, great. Is BFS encouraging developers to use React over other frameworks?
I think this is definitely like my mantra, which is like we want Shopify's app developer platform to be the web, which is a very open canvas, has been for over 20 years, which is why you saw a lot of the changes to AppBridge rely on a lot of standards that have been around for 20 years, and I think you're going to continue to see that over time. I think right now that, like as folks have pointed out, Polaris inconveniently is only for React. And again, we want to change that. And we want to make it so that everyone who knows the web knows how to approach Shopify. So let's stay tuned into this space, and remember that today React is not a requirement. And so right now it's certainly convenient, but we want to make it convenient for everyone in the future.
Great. And this is the last question we'll have time for today. Technical question: is enabling theme app extensions programmatically against BFS? I think possibly what we're talking about here is automatically activating some UI on the online store. And I'm not totally clear on the question, but I'm not sure it's technically possible to actually activate a theme app extension via API. So, Jay-Z, unless you have any other comments there,
No.
then I think that will be all the questions we have time for today. So thanks everyone who submitted their questions and showed up today, and a huge thank you to our panelists for your helpful responses. We hope you all found the Q&A helpful.